One of the things we need to do, I think most, is to be able to fund education. And you saw what we did in December. As we gave additional money and committed additional money to education, we actually reinstated the 6% WPU, which means a 6% increase for education funding, which we actually funded last year, but then we had to reduce it because of the pandemic. We also committed to give teachers a $1,500 bonus, and I think we need to take care of those educators that are trying to do their best to educate our children. They're having to do it online and in person. And the other thing that we need to do is make sure that we can get kids in school in person. And we're seeing that that's more effective. And I think as we enter the legislative session, we'll be encouraging both teachers to teach in person, but also trying to fund education so that we have the capacity to be able to take care of their kids. There's nothing I think more important than taking care of our children and making sure that they have a great education.
As we try to recover economically, we should also think about recovering the academic loss for our students. And that can only be accomplished by making sure that we give some high-level quality instruction to go forward, so that if there are gaps in the learning, that we help cover those gaps and help our children get back on track for where they would have been had it not been for the pandemic and the consequences that they've suffered as a result of that, through no fault of their own.
Well, the first thing we've got to do is make sure that all of our kids are actually back in school. And we've seen, just as an example, some really concerning numbers out of the Salt Lake School District, where there's a 7-fold increase of children failing this year. And there's 1,000 students that have really become unaccounted for. Just in that one school district. And that's happening all across the state to a lesser degree, but it's happening in other places. We've got to make sure these kids get back in the classroom. We have been notified and will be receiving some additional money from the federal government related to COVID. And a lot of that's going to be flowing into our public school system. I think it's really incumbent on us and a real responsibility that we have to use that money first and foremost to help us get these kids caught up from being disrupted since last March in terms of their education.
We know that with our kids, there's a window of opportunity that's relatively narrow and small. I mean, if you take a couple or 3 years out of a preschooler, not a preschooler, but a K through 12 child's education, it can have an impact that is very, very hard to overcome. And so I think that we've got to be aware of, educate ourselves about what kind of negative impact being taken out of school or not having the kind of learning experiences that they would have before the pandemic hit. Different school districts have handled these things differently across the state, and I think it's important that they be allowed the latitude to make the best decisions that they can based on information that's important for them and that they think is the best reflection of science and facts. But I also think, again, we've got to have greater resources targeted to the vulnerable communities within the school districts that, we've got our Title I schools, and they're the ones who I think really we should be focusing our greatest level of resources towards.
We need to find ways to close what I think has been a learning gap. And that learning gap in terms of where we expected students to be at this point in time versus where they are. So looking at enhanced summer enrichment programs, after school programs, and other opportunities that we can assess where students are now. What are the particular areas that they need help and support in so we can catch them up to their grade level and the education outcomes that we expect for them.
There's some critical grade levels, like for instance, if we know if students aren't reading by 4th grade, they're likely to struggle the rest of their school. We know that there are some classes in junior high school and some skills that are essential for them to be successful in high school. So I do hope that the legislature and the state board of education, because it's a shared responsibility with the local school boards, that we do have some opportunities this summer for students to maybe go to summer school, if you will, and catch up on those things. One of the things that I think we can do as a legislature is look for ways to provide that additional support, whether that be after school, whether that be through the summer, to make sure that we're not losing them, that we're not getting further behind. And ideally, it would be great if not only can we help them stay at grade level, but help them thrive during the summers or after school. And I think that'll do more than anything else, getting them back up to speed, getting them at the same level. That will help them not just for this year, but for every year going forward. I know for my wife as a teacher, she'll have a few kids that get behind, and some of them, English is a second language for them. They get even further behind during their summers and after school. And for my wife, that means as a teacher, she's now having to spend, quite a bit of her time working with these 2 or 3 students, and at sometimes the detriment of being able to work with the rest of the class. And so if there's ways that we can help support those students that are falling behind and providing these additional resources, not only will it help that student, but it actually will help the education for the rest of the students in those classes.
One of my biggest priorities is keeping them healthy. So we need to address a way of talking about all of our kiddos being covered and having access to quality care, healthcare. We've learned that the pandemic hits in so many ways, and children also can be affected from a healthcare perspective when it comes to that pandemic. But at the same time, we also need to address their education gaps, and those are real. I mean, there's no way we can believe that, finishing a school year prior to what was expected, moving into an online education without having an infrastructure was not going to affect the outcome of the education achievement of our kiddos. So I worry that unfortunately many kids that are already disproportionately being impacted by social determinants of health and income gaps and achievement gaps are now going to see this bigger gap. We need to talk about after school programs as an opportunity to bring education and help the education gap. We need to talk about childcare and high quality, adequate childcare. So kids that are still struggling, especially the younger ones, preschool, high quality preschool and early childhood education are critical. So I'm hoping that because we've seen it firsthand, and because many, especially of our elected officials across the state, not only the state legislators, but local government officials have kids there of their own, and they've now been facing this because, of course, the pandemic hit. It was an equal opportunity, impact to everyone. That they realize that if it's difficult for them, it's going to be even more difficult for families that have other issues that were already there. High quality, evidence-based after school programming, those are critical in our state for families, especially working families, to make sure they have a place where their kids can go after school. Most jobs do not end at 3 p.m. Most people have to work more hours, and it makes it really hard when you don't know when your kid is, if they're safe, if they're having good programs that can help them strengthen their academics, but also their social interactions. And so there's a lot of benefits to having high quality evidence-based after school programs. Right now, we need them more than ever. And we have an opportunity with great partners to make that happen.
One of the things that I think is important is paraeducators. In a school, it's a community. It's really a map of our system and the neighborhoods around it. And paraeducators are helpers. They're in the classroom, and teachers need that. Everybody needs to be on the same page to make sure those classrooms work effectively and every child can be taught. We need more people in the classroom, one-on-one, helping those children.
We need to start talking about the social determinants of education and what pieces that make for a safe environment for our kids to thrive in. We need to talk about resiliency and how do we model and how do we educate our kids to be resilient. And we're going to see resiliency with our students in this year and the next year. We're going to see it in different ways and in incredible ways. And how can we take these lessons and continue to help our students to thrive?